Salve. It's February 11th, 2020. This is Lindsay Sudeikis here. And it's on my heart to share about spiritual infrastructure. And so there's my voice, there's my little heart beating fast. And so may I honor that which is coming through. I've been thinking a lot about Yeshua, the Hebrew pronunciation of Jesus, and how Yeshua seems to have really oriented by being part of this ancient mystic trinity. He is situated in a way that is impregnated and imbued with a communal solitude, that just by virtue of his presence, of his essence, he's in community, and in a community of persons. So I'm sharing about the spiritual infrastructure piece and Yeshua as part of this mystic trinity, because having had the great honor and privilege and gift to be on the ancestral lands of some of my own ancestral lands of Ireland, whilst there, I was just so struck viscerally, somatically, how the land, the rivers, the stones, the oak, the hawthorn, the Irish Sea, the River Nore, the River Gale, we're just dripping with ancient mystic trinity. And it seems that here in the United States, and in the Catholicism, the Catholic Christianity that is on these lands can be dogmatic about Christ. And instead of being loose and holding mystery with kind of a loose, playful garment, if you will. So thinking about that kind of with the spiritual infrastructure piece. And, when one looks at the life, and why even look at spiritual infrastructure? Why care about ancient mystic trinity? And I would, for me, and I think for so many of us, we are curious about from whence we came and to whence we shall return, knowing that there's a continuity of our lives with our back body and our current continuous body of all the humans that are alive and the other than humans, the beloved animal kin and the beloved tree kin. And then when we breathe our last, it's like that tapestry of continuity. I'm just trying to kind of give some framework or cosmology. Amongst so many of thousands and thousands of humans who've tried to speak to such, but it's just coming through. So here we are, the collective here we are. So when looking at the life of Yeshua, at Christ, it's amazing that if the spiritual infrastructure piece, the fundament, the base, really seems to be his ancestral back body. So much so, it matters that in Catholic Christianity, on the Feast of Christmas Eve, the gospel reading that's chosen to be read throughout the Universal Church, whether one is in Palestine or whether one is in Lithuania or whether one is in Scottsdale, Arizona, right? No matter where they are, the wisdom of the church is such that on the 24th of December, what's read is the genealogy of Jesus, the ancestral back body from whence he came. And so there's just a real invitation for so many of us who are on our own quest for personal holiness, which is inextricably caught up with collective liberation writ large. It's really a both and, that if we want to kind of follow and heed follow more than, it's following and heeding, listening into the dance that Yeshua has danced before us. He really was in touch with his ancestral back body. He knew from whence he came, which is really significant, like the way that our Hebrew and Jewish kin in 2,000 years ago, which would be modern day Palestine, right? Pausing there. That Yeshua is a Middle Eastern Palestinian Jew. And so let us situate in that space for a moment. And the fact that he knew his back body, it was very different than the Gentiles. You know, the Gentiles actually weren't so familiar with their ancestral back body. And there's a real tension here that seems to still have impact 2,000 years later, you know, where so there's such compassion. And let me breathe. And as all of us on the collective who listen to this now or later, breathing such compassion upon the hearts and the soil and the nuance of Israel-Palestine. There's clearly something that still is eliciting our attention collectively. And so we're one struck that there must be some wisdom, right? That Yeshua and that his Hebrew backbody are Jewish kin, and that our Muslim kin, who certainly honor Yeshua and his prophecy and his quest for union with God and for collective liberation, and you know, this Jewish Catholic Muslim relations that is still so, the origin happened so much on those lands in the Near East, and it's still current. So stay with me as we kind of go from zooming in to zooming out. So knowing our ancestral back body, and I, you know, and compassion around what one means with ancestral. Not necessarily only one's bone and blood back body, because for those of us who may have been adopted, so that ancestor of nurturance, are those of us who may have been raised by an auntie who wasn't blood kin, but she certainly is impacting us and influencing us, and that auntie's grandmothers and her grandmothers and her grandmothers. But being in touch with that feels like it matters, and us not being in touch with it, in my humble, small yet mighty opinion, it feels to be it's the cause of some of the collective trouble that we're inside of. So the spiritual infrastructure, the fundament, it seems like it's this ancestral terrain, knowing from whence we came and negotiating that and being in symbiotic relationship with that. And for many of us in the 21st century, we might need to do some sort of lineage repair work to learn how to be in connection once again with our ancestral back body, whether of bone or of nurturance. Then there's like this second tier that Yeshua seems to expose, to Yeshua being part of that ancient mystic trinity. So holding it with mystery and with mystique. But the second plane seems to really be the elements, the rivers and the stones and the moon and the stars. And again, so many of our Catholic Christian kin bypass that. And so many of our Catholic Christian kin bypass their ancestral back body and bypass the elements, and they go straight to, sometimes only straight to Christ, and not even straight to the most holy Trinity. Yet what would it look and feel and sound like if Catholic Christian folks and other folks who feel called to the path of the Christ mystery, which is universal and inclusive, if first we were tapping in with our ancestral back body, then that second tier, asking our ancestral back body, what are some of the ways you all used to commune with the elements? So in my specific case, it was so clear to me that some of the ways that our very own ancestors of nurturance and bone communed with the Irish Sea. So when being on those lands just now, I felt like me and the Irish Sea became intimates, you know, that our people would have drank from that fount for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, if not millennia. And so if they found resource, so many of my grandmothers and grandfathers, by communing with that Irish Sea, then perhaps I too can find resource and nourishment from communing with the sea. And I don't think any of us has to go necessarily to the land. I mean, the power of imagination is such, and the power of prayer, the power of mindfulness, the power of heartfulness, that just by simply pausing and listening in and thinking about the local body of water that perhaps your grandmothers and grandparents and grandfathers could have communed with, and invoking that. But the reference point here of Yeshua is, in the baptism of Yeshua, he was doused, this mikveh moment in Hebrew, like being really doused in the water in this ritual with the River Jordan. And he communed with the River Jordan as though his very life depended on it, because it did. And he knew that. And so there was an intimacy and a sacred reciprocity that he had with the rivers. Not with the River Jordan is one case, right? Or the Sea of Galilee is another example. And the mountains, right? When being in the mountains, knowing how the mountains hold the ancient stories, and the deep, deep time. I mean, if Homo sapiens have been around for 200 to 300,000 years, like the mountains far surpass in time and breadth and width. And so many of us know that when we commune with the mountains, when we are hiking, or it's like, wow, everything's going to be just fine. There's a real regular sizing of who we are and how we are in the world. And yeah, the context of the elements, just that Yeshua, and even the stones, right? Yeshua even talks about the stones in the Gospel of John, that even these stones will speak, he says. So this ancestral, so in the spiritual infrastructure, it seems that one way to approach one's quest for personal holiness and collective liberation is to, what's the fundament, this ancestral terrain. Then the second tier up would be the elements, and how might you feel called to commune with, maybe when the new moon happens, or recognizing that the stardust, we're all parts, the stardust is inside each of us, right? Scientists are telling us that how we're all part, that we came from the stars. So badass and so beautiful and luminous to think about, powerful to think about. So the elements, and then would be, the ineffable, what I refer to sometimes as the ineffable, because let's be honest, right? There's just source, herself, himself, themself. And here, when we think about the mystery of source, like how to be inside that mystery and not dot our I's or cross our T's or have the answers, rather how to be invited into this communal solitude of Elohim, Yeshua, Rucha, Imam Medium, Hebrew for source, Jesus, the primordial breath, and Mother Mary, like how to be invited into that dance and that alchemy of penetrating love, of ever-flowing compassion, of life-giving forgiveness, of liberatory truth, of grounding wisdoms, plural. Really the ancient mystic trinity is that ever ancient problem of what philosophers would call the one and the many. And here it is in Catholic Christianity showing up, the quote Godhead, the triune God, what I'm naming and what others have named, ancient mystic trinity, that before that mystery, we can become silent and widen our hearts and our spirits and our bodies to be loved on and seen and celebrated. And so all of that can happen with our ancestral back body, our grandmothers and grandparents and their grandparents and the grandfathers, and with the elemental terrain that we feel called to and that can be resourced by, and with the ineffable mystery. And so behold all of the backing that each of us, by virtue of existing and being, has access to, has resource to, and is rooting for us. The holy ones, the ancients, are for us and are longing for us to be for one another, and we really do belong to each other. And I think I honor that maxim. And again, physics are showing us the same, right? That we're inextricably and organic, or inherently and organically connected to one another, to all that is. And so it's that, coupled with acknowledging the deep wounds and collective troubles and systemic injustices that are on all the lands from which anyone who's listening now or later hail from. There's ever the commingling of the brokenness and the blessedness and the belovedness and the trauma, the collective trauma. And so how is it that we can live in the nuance of the two, and not only see the collective trauma, and not only see the brokenness and the hatred and the war, and how is it we can be not only in the belovedness and the sweetness and the we belong to each other, but how to really be embodied and present and with the blessedness, the belovedness, and the brokenness and the collective trauma. And it seems that when we access this spiritual infrastructure that each of us can, and together we actually can access it, the portal becomes even more like a vortex, with touching in and being in symbiosis and relationship with our ancestral back body, with the elements, and communing and being in symbiosis with them, and then with ancient mystic trinity or ineffable, in whatever way that feels available for a person. So grateful for having a moment to have some folks here who are present and witnessing, feeling the presence of those of you who are on right now, and feeling the presence of those who will listen at a later moment. I'm just going to end with Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Ima Mariam, Mother Mary, is a potent being. Yeah, okay. Blessings on everyone's Tuesday evening from Lenape land.